consultants with the health authorities to protect those most vulnerable to the virus. The Missouri Veterans Commission has restricted access to all visitors, volunteers, and vendors until further notice. The Missouri Department of Corrections has suspended visitors at state correctional facilities, and the Missouri Department of Mental Health has also restricted visitation access to state mental health facilities. Public tours and events at the state capitol have been shut down to encourage social distancing. Today, I announced that Missouri casinos will be closed through March the 30th in order to help prevent the spread of the COVID-19. Also, at 2:30 p.m. today, a total of 432 Missouri public school districts and charter schools out of 555 have closed or soon will close. Additional restriction measures will be forthcoming. The coordination and communication is so important that we pass that down to local levels. I also want to commend the Vice President of the United States. He is on weekly phone calls with the governors across the United States to give us updates from the federal level. I also want to say the President himself was on the call this week and spent an hour with the governors across this state to tell us what they were doing on the federal level. I think it's important to know that on those conversations, one of the main things that was emphasized was that the idea of how fast and how much they were wanting to get things to the local level. And the reality of it, it's not a funding issue, it's more of a production issue. How do you produce the product to get it to us? And I think all hands are on deck to make sure that happens. I also had a call with emergency personnel today, with county commissioners, with sheriff, emergency personnel in the local levels. That's important to me. There's probably over 500 and some other people on that phone call today, but it's important to me to make sure that we get the information to the county levels to where the boots are on the ground. They understand what we're doing at the state level and what's coming. I did a similar call this last Sunday with the mayors, some of the mayors around the state of Missouri, to give them a briefing, to try to get the information what we can do better to help them. We will be traveling. As you've seen for the last couple of days, we're going to be traveling to a lot of communities around the state of Missouri. We were in St. Louis, Springfield, Kansas City, and St. Joe. Today we were at Hannibal, Kirkwood, and at Columbia today. And tomorrow we'll go to Poplar Bluff, Haiti, Cape Girardeau, and Joplin. The main thing we're trying to do is make sure that communication line's open, because to me, one of the most important things I can do for governor right now is make sure the local levels know what we're doing here and that what to expect in the future. I think informing the public, letting them know. For example, I do believe that we're going to be in this status for some time. I don't believe the coronavirus is going to be over in a week or two. I believe we have to consider that this is going to be here for months. And I believe we have to be prepared for that every day. And so this is the beginning of that preparation to make sure that we're making sure all Missouri understands the resources that we have and what's available at state government. All 16 departments, all 16 directors here understand that we're going to take all our resources we can to do whatever we can to fight the coronavirus and to make sure public health and public safety are the priorities as at the state at this time. I also want to mention the fact that all state agencies will be open for business, as well as the governor's office. We'll be working here on a daily basis to make sure we're providing the services to the people of this state. I will give you an update on the Missouri COVID-19 cases update. And as of today, there has been 253 people have tested negative. There has been 15 people that have tested positive. These cases include 4 in Greene County, 4 in St. Louis County, 1 in Boone County, 2 in Cass County, 1 in Cole County, 1 in Henry County, 1 in Jackson County, and 1 in St. Louis. One of the 2 positive cases in Cass County and the 1 case in Jackson County will be reported from commercial labs. You will see more of that in the days to come, and you will see more test results coming in on a daily basis as we go through this process. Let me say this in closing to the people of Missouri. This is going to come down to personal responsibility, how we conduct ourselves as one another in the state, what we do to help one another to prevent the coronavirus from spreading. It will come down to all of us, and it'll be all of our personal responsibility to do just that. We have to practice social distancing. You have to understand how important that is if we're to fight the coronavirus. Those are the things that will change lives. Those are the things that will protect us by doing those things. But the prevention is critical. It's critical to fight the coronavirus. And I call on all Missourians to take that practice seriously, to understand the consequences. If we spread this disease further, it will be a daily fight for several months that we'll have to fight the corona disease. And we need to be working together as citizens of the state of Missouri to do that. Let me and the other thing, and finishing up before I let Todd Richardson come up here, I think one thing that we all should remember, this changes daily. Everything in this arena can change. The regulatory environment can change. We can make decisions here daily. The treatment process, the mobile units that are going to be out there, can be everything to do with the coronavirus could be a daily operation of change. That is why we're going to try to do the briefings a little more often, to try to make sure you have the ability to get that information out to the public on that. I know we're changing some eligibility requirements at social services, so I am going to let Director Richardson speak to that for a few minutes. Todd, do you want to speak on that?
Governor, thank you, and thank you to you all for being here tonight. Over the last several weeks, the Department of Social Services and the Mo Health Net Division have been working closely with our partners at the Department of Health and Senior Services and at the Department of Mental Health to make sure that we are making the necessary policy revisions to allow the state to respond quickly to COVID-19. I wanted to give you a list of some of the actions that we've already taken to date, and then also give you an update on some of the actions we'll be taking in the coming days. Missouri Health Net, over the last several days, has eliminated all copays for COVID-19 testing. We have relaxed early refill policies to allow people to more easily access their prescriptions. We have updated our telehealth policy to make sure that telehealth can be provided in any setting and under any circumstance, including by telephone, by Skype, and even by FaceTime. We've made revisions to our laboratory and x-ray rules to make sure that people can get the necessary testing they need. And we've also enhanced our provider communication and outreach. We have been working directly with the Centers for Medicaid Services in Washington to request additional waiver authority and flexibility from our federal partners. We have also, as the department, worked to streamline the process for enrolling providers, including eliminating and discontinuing on-site audits of providers and expediting applications for provider enrollments. Additionally, we have engaged with all 3 of the state's managed care plans to ensure that they have continuity of operation plan and to ask them to disseminate information to their members. In addition, the Family Support Division will be utilizing the new authority created by the federal and state emergency declarations to streamline eligibility processes both for Medicaid and for supplemental nutrition benefits. We have made the decision that we will be suspending annual renewals for the months of March and April, and we will be delaying those scheduled for May and June. In addition, as this event continues to evolve, we will be requesting additional waiver authority as necessary from our federal partners and exercising the new authority that the governor has provided with the emergency declaration.
Okay, we'll open it for a few questions.
There's now a confirmed case in Cole County. I heard from Lieutenant Governor Kehoe that there's a conversation being had about the status of the House convening tomorrow and what it represents now that there's a case in Cole County. Is that discussion being had today, and when will there be a decision if
There's been no discussion at the governor's office about that.
Do you know if that's a state worker case at all? Is that the Cole County case? Is it a state
Right now, we're still in the process of some of the notifications on all that, to be honest about it. And we'll release that once we can, who it is.
Is there any update on closing bars, restaurants like we're seeing other states doing?
Yeah, at this point, I don't plan to be sure to close it out restaurant. We're gonna strongly suggest that there's alternative way to do that. I think there's a lot of businesses across the state are now doing that, where they're doing carry out, where they're taking orders from the curb. I think, again, that's part of businesses' obligation to do that also, and I think you're seeing a lot of businesses in Missouri doing that. I think when you start going down the road and shutting businesses down, you have to be extremely thoughtful in how you do that, because those are business owners, those are people working, those are paychecks that are out there, and people are gonna lose their jobs over this, the way it is.
7.2 million under the state of emergency declaration funds, and then 13 is expected to come from the federal government. Is that going to be enough? And has there been any more solidified decisions on how that money is going to be spent specifically?
Yeah, we're working on that process right now. I mean, we've been working on that every day, how we're going to distribute that. We're in that process right now. I do believe there'll be more federal money. The way it looks like, what they're talking about up there, there'll be a significant amount coming down to the state. So I think there's more to come. But I think that 20 million right now that we have available, to get that out would be extremely helpful to the locations around the state.
So not all schools here in the state are closed. Kansas governor just shut down all schools. Why are we not doing a statewide shutdown of schools?
Yeah, the reason I did that simply is we have about 540 schools in our state. Most of them are very diverse, whether they're in St. Louis or Kansas City or they're in Hayti in the Boot Hill, Missouri. A lot of these school districts that we're talking about doesn't have daycare for one. A lot of the schools are the main employer of those areas and those towns and everything. So to me, it was the obligation to leave that to the local levels to decide how they would manage that. And I think you're seeing the majority of the schools closed today. I think out of 550, there's 445. But I think they're the ones that have to deal with that situation. What do you do with those children? How do you feed those children? How do you get daycare to them? How do you provide the services? And in all those towns, in those 540 districts, I think it's best left up to those districts.
How are our health systems faring? I don't know if you've been in contact with hospitals. I know we have not as many cases, 15, but we're seeing other states' health systems are really concerned about just being overwhelmed and having enough resources.
You know what, I think we're extremely fortunate to have the medical profession that we do in this state. The hospitals we have, the medical arena we have, the expertise we have. I was just on the phone before I come out here with infectious disease experts around the state talking about this very problem. That 6 or 7 doctors were on there from all over the state talking about those issues. But I think we're very fortunate in the state to have the medical profession we have, and I think they're well prepared for this. Although, look, we all are concerned about the coronavirus. I think for the general public, we're concerned about it. But I don't think you can live through this out of fear. And I think that's the one thing we need to emphasize to the public every day. The concern, yes, but fear shouldn't be driving this virus, and fear shouldn't be driving how people react to the situation.
Governor, I'd like to get your take as well as Dr. Williams. I understand all Department of Health and Senior Services employees have been directed to work from home. How could that impact department functions, and how did you come to that decision?
Thank you. As you know, when the governor first came into office, the first thing he did, being a former sheriff, was ask us to look at our continuity of operation plans. And so we did that, and so part of that, as we move forward, government has to operate. And so we want to do that as safely as we can. So for those employees who can work from home, and it's not all of them, but for those who can, as part of our social distancing, which we think will flatten this curve and hopefully keep less people getting infected, we've activated that part of the continuity of operation plan. But it's incredibly important, as the governor says, everywhere we go. It's very important for people in Missouri to know that we in government are going to be here every day working. We've activated the CEOC. We're there every day now. And so we just think in these cases, the example I've used before is, as a doctor and the governor as a sheriff, when I used to walk in the room, people would say, "I'm so glad you're here." The sheriff, thank goodness you're here after a car wreck. And so what they mean by that is, we're so thankful you're here with the expertise and education and experience you have to help us. And so we are very much committed to doing that.
So working from home may not always be the most convenient thing to do. I'm sure a lot of businesses across the state are working with it right now. Does the state have any concern of any incontinuity of function, or kind of what's when it comes to working from home? How is that transition?
Well, we have a fair number of people who work from home just during regular activities. We think that's good. The less they travel, the safer they are by not being on the roads. It makes them more efficient. You're not commuting. We have a lot of people who commute from 45 minutes an hour away. So we're always looking for ways to help people telecommute. But as you know, there are many jobs in the state government where you can't commute. I mean, you have to be at a window, you have to be servicing. But it's always our goal to try to be as efficient as we can.
Governor, last question. How are you feeling? Is there, I know that the government officials like the president have been asked if they plan on getting tested or anything like that. How are you?
Well, I feel fine. If anybody wants to hang around with me for a day or two, I'll show them how to keep up the pace is all I got to tell you. I feel great. You know, I'm just concerned about the people of this state. Every day when I come to work, I'm trying to figure out how do I do a better job. And if it means working more hours, that's fine. I've done that my entire career when it comes to working, but it's really important to me to make sure I'm doing everything possibly I can for the welfare of the people of this state. The people I love and the people I go up here to represent every day. So I'm gonna have my A game on every day when I come to work. Thank you.
Now, we have one more time for one more question.
Can you talk about the military's role in all this? You had talked about the National Guard a little bit. What are they doing in this whole situation? And are there going to be like quarantine sites maybe on bases? Talk about PPE and all that stuff.
Yeah, you know, we're going to use our guard as whatever way we can utilize them to help. If that's setting up the temporary sites, we'll have them out there doing the manpower to set those up. They'll be providing those locations. If we can use them in other resources, we will. As far as long-term quarantine or things of that discussion, you know, we plan short-term and we plan long-term. We look and see what facilities we have there in the state, what's available, such as an old hospital, such as a nursing home, such as what state facilities we have, where they might be, such as the state fairgrounds or open areas. All of those things that we look at constantly are in the process of figuring out what would we do if those situations occur, because that's just, you know, I've got SEMA involved in that, I've got the Director of Public Safety involved in that, I've got General Compton involved in that. Those are all things that we're prepared.
We have one more.
Thank you. So when it comes to kind of like the homeless community here in the state, is that something that you guys are looking at, or is it going to be a county by county basis, and how to keep those people safe and get them to come out for testing?
Yeah, I think one of the things when we talk to the local level, that's why it's so important for us to be out communicating with those local levels to figure out how we're going to help with that. And can we do mobile labs per se? Can we take those mobile labs to those areas? When we talk about getting distance from a hospital or setting up a drive-through, I mean, to me, we got to be able to get in areas where people can't get there, you know, because they can't walk, they can't get there. So we got to keep that in mind to be able to go test them. Because the last thing we want them is to spread that virus amongst ourselves, which they'll be in contact with a lot of people. So yes, it's something we're thinking about, and it's something we're trying to find the right combination to be able to do that. But I think the local levels are doing a good job of that too. When I go to these towns, when I go to these hospitals, it's one of the things they bring up about them in that community. So, you know, that's an everyday citizen out there, just like whether you live in a fancy house or whether you live underneath a bridge. You know, you should have that same right to the medical services in the state.
Okay, thank you very much.
I realize it's
Thank you. All right, thank you all very much for being here. You should have a press release kind of summarizing just what we talked about. There should be two that have gone out, so we'll send out a media advisory tomorrow morning to let you know exactly when we'll do this again. I anticipate a couple of new things tomorrow, so we'll just continue this cycle just to kind of get through. Is there anything that we are not providing that you need?
What time do you think?
It's going to be again in the evenings. He's going to borrow the key for our area, so I think his last stop.
Good evening. I'm Casey Nolan. This is Anita Mannion, our political analyst. I'm the political editor for Five on Your Side, so therefore you might know this is going to be a political discussion. Anita, thanks for coming back.
Thank you. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
I know we both
to
got
you
our
both.
green.
Green as well. Not your typical St. Patrick's Day at all.
No green beer, no Dogtown.
Can you believe it was a week ago tonight that we were sitting? What? That feels like a year ago
It
that we
does.
discussed the Missouri primary. Until tonight, a little bit different. If you happened to catch us at all last week as we discussed the Missouri primary, a little bit different. Anita, we're keeping our distance, and then also there will be no in-house guest because we are limiting the number of people who come into the Five on Your Side studio. Just to kind of give you an idea of what we've got going on here, there are 3 states around the country holding primaries, Illinois being one of them. So we're going to focus on Illinois. We've got the presidential primary.
Right.
On the Democratic side, that's where the action is between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. And then we've got a list of other races between congressional primaries that are up to even a race to potentially converge a town. Okay, so what you're seeing now are our first numbers with 1% reporting. We're getting our first numbers right here, right now, and we're showing Joe Biden with a commanding 64% of the vote. Now that's just with 1% reporting. Anita, we know the Illinois Board of Elections has said they've seen some pretty robust early voting.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised by that because unlike Missouri, Illinois has early voting. And so folks could have been voting anytime they wanted, gone into a polling place when people weren't going to be there, and save themselves from encountering lots of folks today. They also have mail-in voting. So 2 ways that people could have voted in this time of fear of coronavirus without going to the polling place today.
A lot of our discussion, I don't know if you can talk about anything right now in America without it having, without at least considering it through the lens of coronavirus. So that's going to be part of our discussion tonight as it pertains to our democracy, quite frankly.
Right.
With that 1%, do you have any ideas? Do you think that's them getting the early voting tally in, or is it too much to kind of dissect there?
Yeah, I doubt that that's early voting right there, but it seems to be just precincts reporting.
Okay. You're right. I'm sorry. That did say 1% of the precincts reporting.
But I expect Biden to have a strong performance in Illinois. He won every county in Missouri, every county in Michigan, and so I would suspect that he's going to do well in Illinois today as well.
As we go through this list tonight, we want to hear from you if you have questions, and we also want to hear from you if there's anything. We're working out some of the gremlins in the system, so if you can't hear us, let us know, or if something's not working, let us know. We'll fix it. We're full service here. We're highly responsive to feedback. But we do, Jordan Palmer, you might be able to hear him at some times. He's our digital director. He will be looking at what you were saying and getting your questions to me. Shelley, Karam, and the whole team over here, they're the ones working on the visuals and getting the signal out to you. Okay, so again, just kind of running down, we've got the presidential primary, we've got Illinois' 15th congressional seat, people are watching that. We've got the, District 12 as well, 13. Durbin's up for re-election, not really much of a challenge there, I would imagine. And then we mentioned it briefly, Allerton and Centerville will be voting on whether this should become a brand new city, a brand new name, and then on down the list we've got some medical marijuana things. So we've kind of highlighted some of the things that are particularly more locally has the attention of our viewers.
And I would just point out that today we have all these things to talk about, where last week it was really just focused on the presidential primary, because in Missouri, that's all people voted on last week.
Right.
In Illinois, all their primaries are today. So for us in Missouri, we'll vote again in August on these primary and some referendums and stuff. But in Illinois, they voted on all kinds of things today. So there's lots of action.
Okay, so since we have a minute before the numbers come in, let's talk about how coronavirus, COVID-19, plays into this. We saw Ohio has postponed their elections.
Right.
Illinois decided to go ahead. Gosh, what are you reading? What are you hearing from people? That's a hard decision because people obviously have concerns. Public health officials have concerns, but nevertheless, democracy must go on. We've got to have people to lead us and make decisions about big issues like coronavirus. Illinois is different than like you said, Missouri, though, not just in what's on the ballot, but how people cast their ballots.
That's right. And so actually St. Louis County has proposed we have elections in April in Missouri, municipal elections. And so St. Louis County has went to the courts and said that they want to either back up those elections and or have mail-in ballots in Missouri. So far that's been denied, but they can appeal it.
Because currently you either have to go vote in person or you can do an absentee, which is kind of like de facto mail-in for a lot of people. You're not supposed to do that.
It is, but we don't have no excuse early voting. So you have to sign that you have a reason not to go in. You have to have it notarized, so that it's a much bigger process than just early voting or mail-in ballot.
Correct. Thank you for making that distinction. But in Illinois, maybe some more options. We talked about the turnout in absentee. That's obviously, well, not obviously, but potentially people concerned about being in a polling place, making a decision. As recently as 5 days ago, you were telling me you could decide to do an early ballot.
That's right, and I think a lot of states are thinking about this right now, not just for April elections and August elections, but for the November election, how they need to be prepared. We saw Washington State, which is one of the worst hit with the coronavirus, actually do fine with their primary election because they had mail-in ballots.
Mail-in voting.
Yeah, we saw in California they did some drive-up polling places where folks could just drive up and cast their ballot. So trying to find different ways to handle that.
There are two people on this set, one of whom works in TV and one of whom is wearing a microphone. Those are not the same people. Apparently mine, we're going to say it fell off. I know I put it on at one time. All right, let's see.
So yeah, it is interesting to see how the coronavirus will impact voter turnout tonight. I think the fact that there's early voting and mail-in voting will help in Illinois. Otherwise, Joe Biden has older voters, so you could, and if you had to go in the polling place, you could expect this to maybe negatively impact his turnout. But with the mail-in and early ballot, it may not.
Here's what the Illinois State Board of Elections, Illinois SBE, on Twitter. They said that they've had likely records for early / mail voting in presidential primary, and then they looked at some different recent years. March 17th, 2020, so far they have 600,000 early votes. In 2015 they had 400,000. That's 2016, and so it turns out when you copy and paste from Twitter, it doesn't translate well. I'll find the original. Nevertheless, the point being, they're expecting 600,000 early votes. That's a lot compared to what they've had in the previous years.
It is.
Hey, Casey, this is Jordan over here. I hope you can hear me okay. We are getting word that AP is calling Illinois for Joe Biden.
Okay, so we no longer need to speculate whether that was going to hurt Joe Biden. We now know that the Associated Press has called Illinois for Joe Biden. Any surprise for you on that?
No. Like we said, every county in Missouri and Michigan went for Biden, and so it's not surprised this happened. Even though Senator Sanders did spend a lot on ads, and I think has tried to walk some things back, running ads with President Obama, but I don't think it's a surprise. I think in some ways, through the lens of coronavirus, that could actually benefit Joe Biden.
What do you mean?
So this is a time where people are feeling very uncertain. The stock market is reflecting that uncertainty. People are feeling financially uncertain about the well-being of themselves and their families. And so I think that the sort of familiar, steady hand that they might see Joe Biden as, a predictable entity with government experience, might bode well for him.
If there was an appetite to kind of throw it all out and start over, this is not the time that a lot of people feel like to do that.
Well, I guess I could see another, I agree, and that's the argument I just made, right? Yeah. That it bodes well for Senator Sanders, that sort of steady, predictable hand.
Senator
Biden, I'm sorry, Vice President Biden. Vice President Biden, I'm sorry. But I think what might happen, though, the urge for change might come more in policy, where we're seeing government sort of making some big policy stimulus plans, seeing conservatives like Mitt Romney suggest mailing a $1,000 check to everyone, things that you would have never heard. The Andrew Yang proposal.
Andrew Yang couldn't get $1,000 a month to pass Democrats,
right?
To get everybody to get on board with him for that, and now you have someone on the other side suggesting that needs. Now, I don't believe Mitt Romney has suggested anything beyond one-time payment at this time, but I think that just shows how serious our current elected leaders are taking the news of the coronavirus.
Right, and the Trump administration saying we want to get checks out to the mail in the next couple of weeks. I mean, this is a real shift. And when we're talking about paid sick leave, covering people for testing through the government, these are progressive policies that we've heard Senator Sanders and others talk about, the lack of a social safety net, the need for health care coverage. So it is an interesting dynamic of wanting that steady hand, but sort of doing these big policy measures.
Whoever you think should be paying for it, I think it's safe to say there's some exposure in our system when something like this happens, that large numbers of people don't have insurance, don't have sick leave. Again, there are obviously a lot of different philosophies on how those people should be able to take care of themselves, but I think it'd be hard to argue that there aren't some holes in the system one way or another, whether it be privately taken care of or the government's responsibility.
Right, even when it comes down to hospital beds and preparedness and things like that, investing in the CDC. And so I think that a lot of that is coming to light, and it will be interesting to see how those short-term policy interventions might influence longer-term policy decisions.
2% reporting now, and Joe Biden's lead, if I remember, has gone up by a point. So that, I mean, I'm not familiar with any elections in the past that have come back from 65 to 29%. You never know. Actually, I misspoke. The Associated Press, on whom we rely, has called it for Joe Biden. So these numbers will, by their math, only hold steady, or at the very least end up in Joe Biden's favor. I want to get to these other individual races, but we're kind of on the topic now, so let's just kind of talk about it. Historic context for this, you talked about, Andrew Yang's idea is now being floated at least as a one-time deal by the Republicans. Are these the kind of crises that can potentially change how we do things in this country for better or worse, depending on your political philosophies? If you think about the Depression or World War II, we got Social Security, we got the GI Bill, things like. I mean, are we on the? Is it too soon to say, or is there potential for some massive change that some have called for and some have fought against?
I think we are seeing some things that Americans really identify with, which is during a crisis coming together. The private sector mobilizing, stepping in, making some of those interventions to protect their workers. Think about the sports leagues and things like that, trying to protect their workers. We're seeing state and local government take measures, and then the federal government with really big proposals, bigger than what we saw during the stimulus for the recent financial crisis.
Right.
So we haven't seen this sort of mobilization since World War II. So it could have lasting impact on how we do things. A lot remains to be seen. The impact on perception of President Trump, whether we come out of this and people say, well, we came out of this strong, the president took interventions, I got a check in the mail, my airline industry was bailed out, or if people say, gosh, we didn't handle that well. So there's a lot still left to be seen. And
the news just changes by the hour.
It's exhausting.
It is. We have to develop a marathon mentality. It reminds me of 9/11, when all of a sudden our world as we knew it had changed, and therefore what we could kind of mentally predict and forecast as we walked around in our lives every day was gone. We didn't know what the future, and that can be taxing mentally, emotionally. And so, yeah, I mean, who knows what kind of political ramifications this could have. We are months, eons, a lifetime, it feels like, away from seeing that. Like you said, when the country's at war, we don't like to change presidents. If the president and his team seem to be making progress or have a handle on this, it's very possible that people will want to stick with him. If God, forbid that things are really bad, that might play differently. Okay, well, let's look at just some of the other things we're talking about tonight. Let's focus, if you don't mind, because this is a race for potentially a part-time job. The congressional district, the 15th. And so what we got here is John Shimkus. Oh boy, off the top of my head, 24 years? How long has he had that seat? I should know that.
Oh, I think since 1986.
I'm not going to do the math.
Yeah. So you're about right
there. So but nevertheless, he's been it for a long time. He said he's retiring. However, his district may be retired for him. The census is going to happen. Walk us through what the census could mean for the Illinois' 15th.
So I hope that everyone watching knows that it's time to fill out your census. You're at home, you're bored, you don't want to think about COVID-19. Log on and fill out your census. It's really important that everyone's counted. Missouri estimates for each person who wasn't counted in the last census, they lost $1,300 per person per year. So $13,000 Missouri lost in federal funding for each person that didn't fill out the census. And that includes children, adults. So fill out the census. I'll say it one more time.
This is how the federal government says, this is how big the country is, and more importantly, where the people are, therefore that's how the resources will be distributed.
That's right.
Okay.
And why that matters for Illinois and their congressional districts is just like Missouri, our population relative to other states was down in 2010, so we lost one district. That ended up being Representative Carnahan's district. We can expect to see that in Illinois this year. So they're really trying to make sure that everyone is counted because they don't want to lose that in redistricting, but they're likely to.
There is a set number of congressional seats that have to be divvied up.
435.
And they don't go up, they don't go down, and therefore those seats are distributed throughout the country with the minimum of one per state. So if Illinois goes down in population compared to other places, even if they stayed same, if others go up, they could lose a seat.
That's right. So it's relative to other states as a proportionate distribution. And so this is where your kids can be getting their social studies lessons tonight, right? But
you said on Facebook, it counts. If you're home and you're like my sister with my nephew and it's like day 2 and you've already run out of lesson plans,
that's right.
Anita said this counts as a social studies lesson.
Absolutely. So what happens is after the census count is taken, the states will get that in the first couple months of next year. And they have until the filing deadline for 2022 to then reapportion their districts if a state loses or gains seats. And so if Illinois would lose a seat, it's likely that the 15th district would be the one that was lost.
Because of the fact that because of the fact that it is a traditionally Republican seat and Democrats hold the power in Springfield?
Yeah. So
I mean, it's just that simple.
When Missouri lost a seat, the Republicans hold the state legislature, and it was a Democratic seat that was lost. So that's definitely part of the equation that happens. In Illinois, it's the reverse. So this is a solidly Republican district, and so it would be one that would be likely cut. It also wouldn't have a strong incumbent arguing for it because it'll be a new person, no matter from which party.
Less than 2 years.
Yeah, they won't have a lot of clout to argue for that position. And also those rural areas are losing a lot of population. So for several reasons, if Illinois loses a congressional seat, it could likely be the 15th district.
I'm just scrolling through here real quickly on the Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders. I'm seeing, like you mentioned earlier, it looks like the former vice president will win in just about not all of them are in, obviously, but I don't see anything going for anybody but him.
In Illinois?
In Illinois, yeah. Sorry, we have 2 other states voting tonight, although I believe Florida has already been called for Vice President Biden, and there you see the projected winner in the Democratic primary in Illinois, former Vice President Joe Biden, pretty handily beating Senator Bernie Sanders. You think Bernie Sanders is done after tonight, Anita?
Mathematically, or is his campaign over? Those are 2 different questions, right? Mathematically, if he has big losses in all of these states tonight, that's going to be really hard for him to come back from. I know a lot of his supporters really want him to go the distance.
To the convention.
That's right.
Which probably won't have people, potentially.
I know.
That's in June, right?
Yeah. But in 2016, he did go the distance. So I felt a different tone from him over the last week or so that might indicate he might find a time to drop out. I would say the progressives, Warren and Sanders, have already influenced Biden's policy. We saw that with some of his shifts in the debate on Sunday night. So that's part of their goal. And so if that were their mission, maybe they can continue to influence policy. But Senator Sanders has a lot of diehard supporters that want to keep him in.
Are we calling this, Jordan, or is this just the first numbers we're getting here? First numbers for the Illinois House District 13.
Yeah, so this is not surprising to me at all, and we're not calling it, but I suspect that we can see Londrigan will win this by a wide margin.
She's run before.
She's run before, and I think in the 13th district, we're going to end up seeing a rematch of what we saw in 2018. which is Rodney Davis, the incumbent, versus Betsy Londrigan, who is one of the Democratic primary candidates. She does have a challenger, but the challenger doesn't have anywhere near the funding. She's a Democratic socialist. She's very progressive, doesn't have as much experience.
Can we go back to that last slide just so we know who we're talking about there? Just real quickly, you'll see here the numbers are only getting bigger as more numbers come in. Moving ahead, let's just talk about this, the 12th. Size this up for us. What do we got going?
You know, I am not going to make a prediction on this one, but in the 12th district.
Now's the time if you really want to earn a reputation.
No, I don't. But I made a prediction on the last one.
Okay, fair enough. It's not all Democrats tonight. Like you said, there's a lot more going on in Illinois than we had in Missouri last week. So again, a little bit coming in here, Illinois U.S. Senate.
So one of these folks will challenge incumbent Dick Durbin for the U.S. Senate seat in Illinois. That will be a hard race to unseat that longtime incumbent. He's one of the top Democratic leaders in the Senate.
Yeah.
But they're vying for the opportunity to do that.
And there we have Mr. Curran, it looks like, leading so far. But like you said, whoever it is, it's a pretty long uphill battle when you think about the blue, the deep blue that is Illinois, and how long Dick Durbin has been there, and then the profile he has.
Right.
This is, backing up for just 1 second, this is what we were talking about here. Londrigan, Ms. Londrigan, Betsy, had won this primary previously, and looks like she might again.
So this one I will predict that she's going to win this primary, and then it will be a rematch for her and Rodney Davis.
And how did she do the first time?
It was one of the closest races in 2018.
Yeah.
So she came within like 1%, and so this is a race that the Democrats have identified as a possible flip in 2020. And so assuming she wins this primary, she's already raised a lot of money, and this will be what the Democrats see as a competitive race, an opportunity to make gains.
To pick up a seat in the U.S. House, potentially.
That's right.
The kind of thing where the Democratic National Committee, they actually might put some national money behind her race and get involved a little bit, you think?
Yep. That's definitely a possibility. And she's already raised, I think she started this year with more cash on hand than Davis, the incumbent, actually. So she's doing a lot of fundraising.
You brought up an earlier point as you and I were talking before we went on the air that money doesn't buy elections. What have you seen when it comes, just jumping back to Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders for a second here, because Bernie spent a lot of money.
He did. He spent a lot of money on in-person TV ads and online ads, but he had a lot of money to spend. Also, you know, if you think maybe your campaign, this is do or die day.
Yeah, spend it all.
You might as well invest that money. Also, he has such a strong fundraising system, a grassroots online fundraising system, that he's raising tons of money and he has it to spend.
So why doesn't that translate, or is it just the particular states that we're looking at the last 2 weeks a little more conservative? Money, everyone thinks money is the answer, but we've seen
we asked Mike Bloomberg.
Asked Mike Bloomberg how that worked out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it matters, but it matters at a certain point. So you have to have, Joe Biden was almost out of money.
Yeah.
But then success can lead to money, right? So after that South Carolina win, he raised us $10 million in a weekend. But you have to have a candidate who has that momentum and the strong candidacy first. And if you don't have that, then the money doesn't matter.
If you're just joining us, we are covering the election returns for the Illinois primary. And then, as we've said, you can't talk about anything right now without talking about coronavirus, COVID-19, and the effect that is having. We spoke just a little bit earlier. Illinois does have a slight advantage, I guess you could call it, over Missouri. As we take a look here, this is again who will face Dick Durbin. Numbers holding about the same here. But whoever wins, we've already said, anything is possible, especially given the news right now. You just don't know what might influence voters and who they might want to run out of office. But if we had the next election tomorrow, they would have a pretty big fight ahead of them against Dick Durbin.
That's right.
But anyway, so Illinois does have the advantage when it comes to trying to work through all of the challenges and all of the fears, frankly, of going to a public place at a time like this, in that they can vote without going to a public place.
That's right. And so the only problem isn't just voters being scared of going to the public place, but it's getting poll workers.
Yes.
I don't know if you've noticed in your polling places, but poll workers trend older than the general population.
God love them.
Absolutely.
Who would do it if they didn't?
Who votes more than anyone? Older population. Who works at the polling places more than anyone? The older population. And so when they're at particular risk, it makes perfect sense that they want to stay home, and we can have a shortage of poll workers.
I think it was Arizona I saw that they had 100 and something call out that just weren't going to make it.
Illinois had a bunch as well.
Illinois, we actually saw that even in Missouri a week ago when this was, it just wasn't as all-consuming as it is right now. If we have any, Shelley, how are we doing over there? Any more numbers or anything coming in? Jordan, any?
We're still waiting for numbers.
If you have anything, okay, so we did put up the, let's show the text number, Shelley, if you don't mind. And I'll say this as specifically as I can. The text is the key in this graph here, because this number will ring. Unfortunately, we don't want it to in a time of heightened, situation in the news world. So if you can text, though, that's a better way to actually get your question answered, and then it also frees up our phone lines for official phone calls from folks that need us. So 314-444-5125, and we do really want your questions. You can also, again, everything is coronavirus to some degree. You can also, if you have other questions about other topics like coronavirus, please text those as well. And we are collecting those, and we are working in concert with Washington University to get those questions answered, and then we'll answer those on the air, Jordan.
And of course, if anybody would like to ask a question on Facebook Live, they're free to do so. We are watching that feed. And if anybody has a question for either of you regarding anything about politics, feel free to post right there on Facebook Live.
We'll do our best to answer it.
We will indeed. We will indeed. Okay, let's see. I've got this list here. This is kind of I think it's a fun story. So we got a couple things. We'll hold on the cannabis question for just a second. I want to talk about the combination question, where they're considering combining Allerton and Centerville. I love this story just because they came up with a unique name.
Alcentra?
Alcentra. So will they or will they not have Alcentra? Tell us what you know about this and what's going on, what has to happen.
This is a situation, and we saw this in Missouri recently too, where you have these small municipalities that have lost a lot of population, lost a tax base, usually aging populations in these areas. And so the city council, the mayors are supporting this referendum to combine the two municipalities. They see this as a tax savings. They can combine resources. That they see it as a much more efficient way of going. But the citizens have to vote on that, and it's on the ballot. And citizens often like to keep their autonomy and keep their municipality. They like having that. It's an identity. It is. And they might know their local firefighters or police officers. In this case, they say they would keep those in a combined unit. But it will be interesting to see how citizens respond to that. Now, the supporters, including both mayors, are saying that it will save citizens in tax dollars. So we'll see which wins out, maybe their fiscal concerns or their identity and community concerns. Yeah, it's the village of Allerton with the municipality, the city. The Centerville is a little bit bigger than Allerton, and then they would become the city. Those are names that people in Illinois know this, but for anyone who might not, those actually are determined by population. What you label if you're a village or a city or second-class city or different things like that. Yeah, it is. I can tell you that from my own experience growing up in a small town, that there is a lot of identity. And then also that same thing goes for schools when they try to combine. I mean, almost more so probably than schools than city halls, but a lot on the line there for a relatively small area. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Even though they're small municipalities, it means a lot to the people who live there. Absolutely. Okay, so we have two cannabis questions. O'Fallon, recreational cannabis. Shall the city of O'Fallon allow adult use cannabis business establishments within the city limits of O'Fallon, including the corresponding regulation and taxation? So
walk us through it and remind us. When Illinois passed recreational marijuana, there was also a caveat there that said, we'll make these decisions locally. Is that right?
Yeah, and so you can think of it sort of as like zoning, that these municipalities can decide whether or not they will allow these dispensaries in their town.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
If you bought it in a place where it is legal, you can still possess it and everything else anywhere in the state of Illinois. But if you want to do business, that's different.
that's right. And so we saw some of the dispensaries when recreational passed, right? Having these huge lines,
Yeah.
even needing to shut down. And so there's more and more businesses that want to open dispensaries, and these Highland and O'Fallon are two areas that they're looking at. So they might want that tax revenue, but they might not like that traffic. And some think about like a certain population, quote unquote, that comes with that, sort of like having a bar in your town. Do you want that? And so the voters will decide tonight.
I would say that we're expecting a high turnout, but that's just a stupid joke, and so I won't say it. I just won't say it.
I think you said it.
I won't. No, I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
0% reporting on that particular issue right there, and it's not just O'Fallon; it's also Greenville, a little bit farther out, but nevertheless, kind of east and a little bit north of the metro.
And I believe Highland too. You can insert your joke there.
Well, write your own at home, folks. We're all business tonight. Okay, Jordan, anything coming in?
We do have a question from Ben from Charleston, Illinois, basically asking us to compare the platforms of Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders.
Well, it's an interesting question right now because, as we've said, that platform seems to have leaked into public conversation. There are things that were too radical that now our current elected leaders say we might need to do on a short-term basis. So how do you see the main difference between the two? Because while Illinois has decided, the rest of the country still has some say.
Sure. I would say, one of the big debates in the Democratic primary has been around health care. And so that Medicare for All, which is the Bernie Sanders platform, where Joe Biden takes a more incremental approach, like adding a public option, taking the Affordable Care Act and maybe expanding that. And so I would say that is one of the biggest differences between them, the fundamental differences. They also differ on things like, well, previously on policies regarding maybe free higher education, which Joe Biden indicated on Sunday night in the debate that he is evolving on that. But in general, Senator Sanders has a more progressive or liberal platform. He is a democratic socialist and has these more broad-based ideas about sort of big reforms in the system, big social safety net, where I would say that Vice President Biden is a more of what we would call an incrementalist. Take what you have and then make small changes. So I think that's the biggest difference between the two of them.
And then the two can spin both of those answers to make the other look however they want.
That's right.
Bernie Sanders would say Joe Biden his incrementalism is a sign of his establishment status, although Bernie Sanders has been in the Senate a really long time, and for a while he was the presumptive leader of the Democratic Party. Some would argue he's pretty establishment himself.
He's been leaning more into that identity lately, talking about being a leader of the Democrats in the Senate, but also trying to take his outsider credentials as well as not being a Democrat and being an independent. So trying to sort of play both sides of that.
Since we're making this a lesson, hang on real quick, Jordan.
I was going to say, we got a text in, no identifying name, but asking how many states yet are left to hold their presidential primary elections. And we just saw a post coming out from USA Today talking about how the coronavirus is delaying some of the primaries. Can you talk about both of those?
Okay, let's see. Well, okay, real quick.
Yeah.
The math on the first one, I'll try to do here. But
yeah, I was going to say, I don't know the exact number, but I can tell you that after tonight, we'll have over 50% of the delegates. So
that's what, and maybe you could explain too the difference in how the Democrats and Republicans do it, because the delegates then have to be divvied up within the state, whereas if a Republican wins a state, they get all the delegates that go to the convention.
Yeah. So while you're looking that up,
okay,
maybe I'll give a little bit more of our civics lesson.
Okay,
right?
thank you.
So each political party in the state determines each political party in each state determines how they're going to do this. So in 2020, the Republicans have decided if a candidate gets over 50%, they get all of that state's delegates to the convention, which is how your nominee is decided.
Yeah.
Which means that President Trump will win all of those.
Right.
And then on the Democratic side, they do, and they've done for a long time, more of a proportional race. So if you get at least 15% in a congressional district, you get some delegates, or if you get at least 15% statewide, you get delegates. And so they're trying to merit those out. So that's why you see Joe Biden having been wins and making progress, but Senator Sanders still gets some of those delegates because they're more proportional.
And a lot of the changes Bernie Sanders wanted after 2016.
Yeah, there were definitely reforms implemented in the Democratic nominating process based on Senator Sanders' influence in 2016.
Okay, and the other thing Jordan pointed out, there's some news coming out that the coronavirus could potentially delay. I'm not finding that story myself just yet, but that's maybe not too surprising.
So that it would delay primaries as far as the returns coming in?
The returns coming in is what Jordan was saying.
So I would suspect that's because you have fewer people actually there to do the counting.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I haven't seen that story because I've been
working on it.
here
I'm working on it.
air.
Jordan, I looked on USA Today, but I did not find it. If you see something,
But if it will take longer to count or get the primary returns, that could be a definite factor, that you have fewer people actually working on doing those returns and counting them.
Yeah. Just a couple of things that we've talked about and touched on as we've been talking here. And if we have any more numbers we need to get to, just let me know. Or any other information. Jordan, you need to get to me. We're looking here. The lead, I believe he might have been at 68, but nevertheless, he's
still kind of that 2/3 to 1/3 ratio.
Yeah. But Bernie Sanders will get some delegates out of Illinois. I mean, you get to 15,
Absolutely.
and it's good. By the way, your mic is fine.
I'm wrestling with it.
No, your mic is fine. I just want you to know it's fine. I saw it's on the shot. You look fine. Couple of things. This will be the lightning round here of.
Test me.
Well, hello, Jim. This will be the kind of disconnected topics here. One, the debate you mentioned. If we didn't learn anything else from that debate the other night, I think we learned we don't need an audience. What did you think about that? It wasn't exactly salacious and dramatic, but I felt like they had to kind of like stand on their own there without anybody hooting and hollering in the audience.
I think that there were two factors really impacting it. One, not having an audience, and we saw at that last Democratic debate a lot of audience interaction. And then also just having two people.
Just the two, yeah.
And so the moderators, I thought, gave them lots of space to talk through policy positions. So I agree, it was a more substantive debate than we've seen in the last few.
I didn't mind it personally.
I agree. And if folks at home are still making decisions, I think it really allowed them to hear each candidate's position on those.
And then we were talking about some of the things that people are talking about now, how to help the economy, how to help people during the coronavirus crisis. Education loans, I heard it floated today that maybe we need to either stop payment on any federal loan, or we know Elizabeth Warren her big thing was cancel student debt. I mean, she'd say that when she came out at the beginning of just about every speech.
Right.
Once again, things that we've been hearing that seemed a little too far one way in a time of crisis. I guess depending on your politics, you could say people are more accepting or susceptible to different ideas.
Absolutely, and like you mentioned earlier, FDR was able to push through all kinds of things in a time of crisis with World War II and the Great Depression. I don't think, I hope, what we're in right now is not as dramatic as those, but you are still seeing big policy proposals. Now, there'll be an argument that they're temporary.
Yeah.
Like your taxes, you still have to pay them, but you have an extension. Or you're still going to pay your loans, but we're sort of have a Band-Aid in a time of crisis. But it will be interesting to see if the American people either turn away from those big progressive movements, or if they sort of slip into those and start to accept them.
Like Social Security.
That's right.
You can be pretty conservative and still, you better not touch Social Security.
Oh yeah, it's the third rail, right? So you don't hear people, that was one of the debates during the Democratic debate. Well, would you touch Social Security? No. Would you touch Social Security? No.
Yeah.
And if you ask President Trump, he would say the same thing. Absolutely not.
Bernie's cutting into it a little bit as we get 9%. At what point does he, so if you get to 15%, you're going to get something in the way of delegates. At what point do we know the stat? Like if he can make it to 40, does that make something significant, or do we know how?
So it depends on how those are spread out.
That's the math that the party does.
That's right. And
Okay.
so it depends. So if you get over 15% statewide, there's so many delegates that are allocated statewide. And in Illinois, sorry, I was looking for my numbers. In Illinois, 54 of their 155 delegates are statewide. So those will be proportionate from what those statewide percentages that we're seeing now are. But the other 101, so 2/3 of Illinois' delegates, will be allocated by congressional district. Does that make sense?
Well, if the more populated areas, the party deems need to be better represented.
That's right. So, and then they kind of weigh those by district too. So districts that vote more Democratic get more of those delegates because they know that they'll be more influential in the 2020 election.
Right, right. Okay, there you see the AP has called it, but still Joe Biden with the commanding lead.
Right, and even though they've called it, we don't know how those delegates will be allocated.
Right, that remains to be seen. Back to our other conversation just briefly, it's just popped in my head, you know, the famous quote that people take very differently depending on their view of it. The former President Obama's then Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, said something to the effect of, "You never waste a good crisis."
Right.
Those who support him would say, well, he meant this is a time to infuse money, build the roads. Others who do not like the presidency and the record of Mr. Obama would say, well, this is you take advantage of the situation to lean the country more to the left. But that's a famous quote.
Well, and both sides do that, right?
Right.
So when there is some sort of crisis, something happens, then you use that as a tipping point. We call it agenda setting, using it to get attention to your issue and get public support for it.
Yeah.
And I do agree that this crisis we're in right now will be one of those tipping points.
Yeah. It's like we said earlier, if you're just joining us, we're obviously talking politics tonight, but you can't talk about any of it without talking about the coronavirus and just the kind of weight of the weight, the heaviness of the not knowing of what the future looks like. But one day at a time, and we try to look out for our neighbors. And today our job was to get up and go vote if we lived in Illinois, and that appears to be what people have done.
And I agree that in a lot of ways we say there's so much unknown about what will happen, the impact on elections, on policy, lots of things. But for so many of our friends and neighbors, they're feeling the impact right now because the restaurant they worked in closed, their hotel laid them off, their airline laid them off, and their kids are at home and they're trying to figure out childcare. So for so many of our friends and neighbors, they are feeling that immediate impact. And I think that's where we see a public, private, and individual coming together that I think is emblematic of our American identity, that we come together and help our fellow Americans in time of crisis.
This is something I had heard. I just was trying to get a quick number on it. So the source on this would be the Washington Examiner, a more conservative publication in D.C., but they are saying in a fairly recent report, looks like about half of Americans live paycheck to paycheck.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you've lost your job in what was otherwise a robust looking economy.
Right.
The stock market is by no means an indication, a true indication of the real felt economy, but it was going gangbusters. And I think there is certainly a sense after the last 10 plus years that I'm going to have a job tomorrow. Things are going, and all of a sudden, boy, things have changed in the last 72 hours. Jordan, you got something?
Yeah, I got. There was a question online asking about the Ohio primary because it was canceled. What is the plans for that? Ohio is such a big state.
No, please do. Go right ahead.
It will still be held, it's just being delayed. So that's the current status.
A radically different approach, though, than Illinois. I'm sure Illinois was considering if they had to do this or not.
Well, and a judge said that Ohio shouldn't, and was basically overruled.
Yeah, and I believe they used a provision in the law for a medical emergency or something.
Right, like a
public health emergency that allowed them to ignore the judge's ruling.
Right. And so that will be delayed. And one of the arguments against Missouri trying to delay our April election that the judges made is, what is this August date you're choosing? Is that arbitrary? Because how do we know what the status will be in August? Theoretically, God forbid, things could be worse. Like, we don't know.
Yeah.
And so, again, I hope that this will lead to states examining the way they run elections and thinking about these contingency plans, maybe just reforming their elections so there is more than one way to vote.
I grew up in Missouri.
Me too.
We both did, both kind of quasi small town kids. I lived in Oregon though for a while, where they have mail-in balloting, and I'll never forget thinking that was so strange. But then after a while, you're like, man, it's pretty awesome. It's so convenient. What do people who study politics like yourself because growing up here, I thought that seemed like like an opening for trouble. But I never saw any problems. What do people in the political science world think about other ways of voting that Missouri has not yet embraced?
My colleague studies elections, and this is something that he supports. Also early voting, which Missouri hasn't embraced. So that you could go into a polling place anytime for the last month in Illinois, over a month, and cast your ballot when you're probably the only one there, instead of standing in line, being in a crowded polling place. So some of these election reforms are widely touted by folks who study that.
Increasing access or participation, I guess.
Exactly. That you're not refrained to 13 hours on a Tuesday, that you have lots more options. So if you're in the newsroom all day or in the classroom all day, you can vote on a different day or in a different format. Also, in a time when we're reverting back a lot to paper ballots and concerned about hacking, it's hard to hack the mail, right? I mean, you could have theoretically some voter fraud there, but
someone could potentially steal your ballot or something, but it's
right.
if you take care of it, it's okay.
That's right. Because a lot of my students say, like, why can't we vote on an app? I do my banking on an app. And I think there's really a pullback from electronic forms of voting to a more pen and paper recountable form of voting. And mail-in ballots would qualify as that.
Yeah. I had a thought and I lost it, but that's the danger of live TV. There, Shelley, you saved me. Let's talk about the Illinois U.S. House district race for District 12. This has not been called by the AP, or do we know? We rely on the AP and the work that they do to make a final decision. But to break down what we got and who they will face.
So the District 12, Mike Boss is the incumbent. He is unchallenged on the Republican side. So what we're seeing here is the Democratic primary side. This is interesting to me because and who knows, we only have 4% reporting. I had no idea how this one would go. On this one,
well, that says something, right? I mean, not a lot of name identity and
that's right.
And not a lot
and
of.
neither one was like a huge fundraiser or something. And this is a Republican district, even though Boss only won it with 51.6, I believe, % of the vote in 2018. It's not a district that the Democrats have targeted as competitive in 2020.
Okay.
So we're not seeing like a lot of polling or anything in this
They went after it last time with Brendan Kelly, if I recall.
They did. And, you know, we had a Green
state
Party candidate who took a chunk of that, about 4% or so, I think. In a close election, that matters,
Right,
too.
right. Brendan Kelly, the state's attorney, that was the former state's attorney.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so here we have Joel Funk, who is actually a former Republican. He is an Army veteran, and he grew up on a farm. And so he was the more moderate candidate. And then on the other side, we have Lindsay, who's more progressive. He's been more critical of President Trump, and he's a former administrator at SIU. And so with very, very small amount of precincts reporting, he's in the lead. But we'll see how that develops over the course of the night. In 2018, the Democrats had more success in these districts when they ran a moderate candidate. So this will be interesting to see how this shakes out, what the primary voters choose to do.
Now I remember what I was thinking about when we were talking about the early voting and things. That kind of applies here, and what you were saying about what worked in 2018. Gosh, we don't know what might work next week.
No.
I mean, think back to the Missouri voters, the polling that showed so many of them made up their minds in just the last few days before the Missouri primary.
Absolutely.
Everything okay? I see. Oh, okay. If people are making up their minds at the last minute, with the news changing at the pace it is now, who knows what could work come November. Okay. Anything else you can tell us while we're on the topic of the process? Can you make sense of it for us? What was coming up in April, or what is coming up in April, and when would they want to move that to? That's the question, it sounds like.
Yeah, so in Missouri, we have elections throughout the year, which is challenging for a lot of people to keep track of, right?
Yeah, Illinois is getting a lot of business done tonight. Missouri kind of does it piecemeal.
That's right. And that would be another one of my colleagues' suggestions for reform, to compress those elections like Illinois does to increase voter turnout.
Yeah.
a lot of people have no idea we have an election here in April, and that's a municipal election. And so where I live in Brentwood, we have things on the ballot like a couple bond initiatives for the sewer district or the school district, a school board election, things like that would be on our ballot. So things for your local municipality would be on the ballot in April.
Then we got to do it all again in August.
And then in August, we do our primaries like Illinois is doing today.
Right, for Congress, for Senate, things like that.
That's right. So every member of the House of Representatives is up for re-election in 2020. So we'll do those primary elections. A third of the Senate is up, so we'll do those. Our state legislature, all of those statewide offices like governor, those primaries will all be in Missouri in August, where Illinois is knocking them out today.
Illinois does in one day what we do in 3.
Yeah, that's fairly accurate.
And neither of our senators are in Missouri are up for re-election. Dick Durbin is in Illinois.
That's right.
Jordan, what do you got for us?
Nothing at the moment.
Okay.
Really got nothing.
Okay.
And we see Londrigan still leading here. Like I said, I expect that to be a rematch.
Kind of the opposite of what we saw in the 12th. If we're going to kind of put people into different camps, she's a little more establishment, whereas in the 12th we saw the person you said a little more progressive.
Right. I think that in the other race, though, that are two sort of candidates who are on more equal footing, where in that race with Lonigan, we see a more established candidate and a more unknown candidate.
Does it surprise you to see 5 Republicans spend the time, the energy, the money to duke it out to face a solidly entrenched incumbent like Dick Durbin?
Well, yes and no. I like to see people running, and I don't like to see uncontested races, so
Right.
I think that that's great. And I think that a lot of Republicans are also hoping in 2020 that they can tie themselves to the president, particularly in a conservative district, and that could get them some votes. So if President Trump is surging, when they declared there was a strong economy, lots of reasons to think he might perform well, then that would also be another reason to challenge.
And everyone who is worried about the economy, we just don't know. It could turn right around and go gangbusters on the back
Let's
end.
hope.
If that would be, it would mean that people are going back to work, and I think that's good for everyone.
And that's really the intention of all these stimulus ideas, of bailouts of industry, sending a $1,000 check, all of these things, is to make sure that our economy stays stable and the individuals are safe and secure.
Okay, if you're watching with us, this is 5 on Your Side, primary night in Illinois coverage. I'm here with Anita Mannion, the 5 on Your Side political analyst. But also, you have a day job as well.
I do.
Although right now that day job is different.
Right now I am working from home. So I'm a professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis, and we, like every other university in the area, have moved to online classes. And it's a big adjustment for faculty and for students. Like pretty much every other industry, even here tonight. That's why we don't have guests, right? You're making the adjustments as well.
Yeah.
So this is me getting out of the house for the first time in a few days.
You've been staying at home, as people have asked us to do, and we've certainly done that here with a very limited staff in the building. It's a skeleton crew. It doesn't even quite look like a weekend crew in here. We've got even Ann Allred, our primary anchor at 10 p.m. is anchoring from home. You'll see that happening every night as well. Here we have the Illinois presidential primary for the Democrats. The Associated Press has long since called this. It's interesting to note, though, that the numbers have come down a little bit. That obviously is going to depend on where they are counting those votes to begin with. If it's in a, if for instance, if Bernie Sanders has more support, let's just say around Champaign-Urbana, then maybe those votes come in late and his numbers go up. But that's why you can see a trend change a little bit there. But nevertheless, Bernie Sanders, it has been called that, Joe Biden, it has been called, will win. And as Anita said, that does not tell us yet the number of delegates that he will have. That has to be decided by the party.
Right.
Any other thoughts on coronavirus in terms of politics tonight or going forward? What will you be looking for? I know we can't predict what's going to happen here, but can you think of a time in our history when we've had a challenge to our elections like this, to the democratic process, as we take a look at the
I'm going to go ahead and call this one for Donald Trump.
Yeah, this is the case where they might have counted Mr. Fuentes' hometown first, because it's most likely going to go to Donald Trump. Anything is possible, but that's highly unlikely that Mr. Trump would do anything but win in a landslide there. But you know, obviously the country has been through 9/11. It's been through you know, Pearl Harbor, but never anything where people were afraid, and rightfully so, to be around each other,
Right.
and they had to stay away from each other.
And, you know, even 9/11 wasn't an election year. So when we talk about the impacts directly on elections, that wasn't there. So I will be interested. It's changing campaigns. So Senator Sanders and Vice President Biden have canceled campaign rallies, done, you know, a fireside chat or virtual things. Those rallies are a huge part of President Trump's campaign and also Senator Sanders. So it will be interesting to see how long that lasts and how that might impact their campaigns.
This is Illinois U.S. House. This is District 15, the Democrats. Erica Weaver with a pretty good lead right now. So this is the 15th that we were talking about. This is up for grabs because Mr. Shimkus, after a long career in Congress, has decided to retire, and so it is a more conservative district. I think Democrats will have a little bit of an uphill here, but this one's kind of wide open for newcomers.
Yeah, I think that this is actually the most conservative district in Illinois, so it's going to be an uphill battle for whoever wins this primary. Gaither had formally won the primary. He ran in the general election in 2018, and so I guess if I were horse racing, I would have counted him as the favorite, but with 4 candidates, you have no idea what might happen in that one.
And then on the Republican side, is there anything you can tell us? And again, this is something where there hasn't been a lot of outreach, if you will. Advertising is another way to say it, to where most people don't know too much about them. If we can go back to that Republican, we'll take another look at those.
Yeah, so when it comes to that Republican race, the winner of this is likely to win the 15th district. And I would say coming into this, I would have put Mary Miller at the top of the list. She got endorsement. She has the support of the House Freedom Fund, which is an outgrowth of the Tea Party.
Okay.
Her husband is a state rep, and I would say she's done more fundraising than some of the others. So
she knows politics.
She knows politics. She's done a lot of fundraising. And then the other one who's done a lot of fundraising is Darren Duncan. A little bit more than Miller, but a lot of his fundraising was through a personal loan.
Okay.
And so while those two have both, let's say around about $200,000 that they've raised each, Wolf and Ellington have only raised $8,000 each.
Okay.
While that's not it doesn't decide who wins a race. It's not, but it does sort of show support and the ability to get your name out in an election where you have 4 sort of unknowns running. Both Duncan and Miller are sort of running on a foundation of being farmers, of being Christians, and being conservative. So they have a similar platform, but I would say thus far Miller has gotten more sort of support from the party.
And then, like you said, based on the leanings of the district of the Illinois 15, they will likely have the advantage in the general election, but they might not have a job after the census comes back in Illinois. If it goes as is expected, based on the census runs, by the way, every year.
Right.
It's that we do this big one every 10 years that determines congressional districts and things like that. But
and for our friends in Illinois, I hope they don't lose a seat.
Absolutely, and especially if we don't want it to lose one that's local here. That's less of a voice the St. Louis metro area has in Washington if they do.
Definitely.
But we've talked previously, based on the makeup of Springfield, the politicians in Springfield determine the congressional seats, and since it's controlled by Democrats, they will likely see this as one to get rid. If they have to get rid of one, that's one they likely will go after.
The most solidly Republican district.
The most solid, just like on the other side of the river in Missouri, when Russ Carnahan had a solidly, actually he kind of had a little more moderate Democratic, but for Missouri, a solidly Democratic.
Right, and then they could split that up and put the Democrats with District 1, and then put, the Republicans from that with a more conservative district.
Right, to give them a more solid Republican district there, Jefferson County going on down. Okay, well, let's take one last look at what we've got coming in. Do we have any numbers yet? I think I would like, before we get out of here, I'd like to know if we have any indication on Allerton and Centerville combining, and or that's a smaller area where the coronavirus concerns might actually impact the process of getting things done. If you've only got X number of just a few judges and a few don't show up, or a few, other municipal workers aren't able to come in.
Right.
And then the other one, I'm just curious, I think people might be interested to see on the on the marijuana referendums for O'Fallon, and then Highland, and I've already forgotten the other one. Oh, Greenville.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, two of those have like a mnemonic device in the name.
Right.
I should be able to remember those. Anything else you're watching? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and two, we should know more about those by the 10 o'clock broadcast as well.
Yes. And Anita's kind enough. We will have something on to condense what we've talked about tonight on the Five on Your Side broadcast. And a lot of people have been tuning in. We've actually, with so much news, added a half hour at night. There's the Allerton-Alcentra vote. As we mentioned earlier, both Allerton and Centerville have to vote on whether to become Alcentra, and so far we don't have any results to report on that one. As just kind of, you were talking, Anita, this just kind of a matter of resources. As the population has dwindled in that part of the Metro East,
Right.
they feel like they're able to do better as one. And then there's O'Fallon recreational cannabis, already legal in the state of Illinois, but if you want to sell it, you got to kind of, you likened it to a zoning issue.
Right. If you want a dispensary in one of these towns, then they need to approve that.
Same for Greenville. So far, nothing to report there. And I'm guessing it might be the same in Highland as well. Just nationally speaking, recapping real quickly, Florida went to Joe Biden. Illinois goes to Joe Biden. Those are big delegate wins.
Huge. Yeah. And so those are, it will be interesting to see if Senator Sanders speaks tonight, and if so, what he says. After Super Tuesday, he didn't actually speak that night. He waited. And so it will be interesting to see how he and his campaign react to tonight's results.
I think we've covered it. Jordan, anything that you've seen or want to add? Glad you're back with us, by the way. Shelley? No? Anita, last thought from you?
Oh, boy. I guess I would just say that I would like to see the impact of what is happening right now moving forward on our election process in Missouri and in lots of other states, that we can continue to make reforms to allow broader access to voting.
It will be fascinating. April will be a challenge, I think, in Missouri, and then let's hope and pray that August, this is behind us.
Agreed.
But nevertheless, it's likely going to be on people's minds even through November, for sure. All right, Anita Mannion, Five on Your Side, political analyst and professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis. For Jordan Palmer and Shelley Karam behind the scenes here for us, I'm Casey Nolan. Thanks for watching us. We hope to see you on the air at 10 o'clock on Five on Your Side, going all the way to 11 p.m., taking your questions and trying to get answers on the coronavirus. And plus, we'll have all of the latest developments, the latest news. News has been changing and breaking by the hour today, as it has for the last week. That seems like a year for a lot of us, I know. Thanks for joining us, Anita. Thank you.
Happy St. Patrick's.
Happy St. Patrick's. We'll leave it on that note.